Woman buys a dying horse for pennies, faces cruel opposition, and what happened next left everyone speechless. The dusty air carried the sound of laughter and jeers as Isla wandered through the crowded horse auction, her worn boots crunching against the dry earth. She wasn't looking for anything, or so she thought. But then her gaze landed on him. At the farthest end of the pen, hidden in the shadows, stood a horse that looked more like a ghost than a living creature. His once majestic frame was reduced to sharp bones protruding from his emaciated body. His head hung low, his eyes void of hope, as if he had already accepted his fate. "Useless," someone muttered, spitting on the ground. "No one's bidding on that one. He's not even worth the bullet to put him down." Isla's heart clenched. She didn't know why, but something in the way the horse trembled spoke to her. It wasn't pity she felt. It was recognition. She knew that kind of despair, the kind that came from being discarded and overlooked. The auctioneer's booming voice interrupted her thoughts. "All right, folks, let's move on to the next one. This poor thing, starting at $1. Who'll take him off my hands?" The crowd erupted in laughter. Isla's hand shot up before she could think. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. "Is she crazy? That bag of bones won't last a week." As the gavel slammed, marking the end of the auction, Isla locked eyes with the horse for the first time. In that fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something, a faint echo of life. She didn't know it yet, but this single impulsive decision would change both of their lives forever. Isla's first night with Echo was nothing short of chaotic. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood in the dim barn, staring at the fragile creature in front of her. He was skittish, his body trembling as if it were foreign to him. Isla gently placed a hand on his side, her fingertips grazing his bones. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. The following morning, the small town buzzed with gossip. Word spread quickly that Isla, a woman who barely managed to make ends meet, had bought the broken horse no one else wanted. The ridicule was immediate. "You really think you can save him?" a voice called out, as Isla walked to town for supplies. It was Victor, the former trainer who had abandoned Echo after his injuries made him useless. He sneered, his face twisted with bitterness. "I've seen it all. That horse is done for." Isla ignored him and kept walking, but the words stung. The stares that followed made her feel small, like a fool for believing that love and care could change a broken soul. Victor wasn't finished. Days later, he appeared at her door, anger boiling in his eyes. "You don't know what you're getting into. That horse is worthless. You've made a fool of yourself, and if you don't get rid of him, I'll make sure you regret it." His voice was low, threatening. "No one wants him, and no one is going to help you." Isla didn't expect the journey to be easy, but nothing had prepared her for the depth of the struggle ahead. Every day, she fought a battle against not just the horse's condition, but the world's harsh judgment. Echo, despite Isla's best efforts, grew weaker. His ribs jutted out more with each passing day, and the signs of infection in his wounds made her worry she was too late. The townsfolk, once sympathetic, began to turn their backs on her. They whispered behind closed doors, saying she was wasting her time and her money. Isla spent nights lying awake in the barn beside Echo, comforting him with soft words as his body continued to battle the infection that threatened to take his life. But no one came to help her. She barely had enough food for herself, let alone a horse that required constant care. The vet she trusted stopped returning her calls, citing the horse's poor prognosis. Even the local feed store, where she'd always been a loyal customer, turned cold. "Sorry, we don't carry anything for that kind of animal," the clerk had said, eyeing her as if she were the problem, not the horse. But Isla couldn't walk away. She remembered his eyes, that flicker of hope when they first met. She couldn't let it die. No matter how much the world turned against her, no matter how many times people told her to quit, she couldn't let him down. Weeks passed, and with each sunrise, Isla poured more of herself into Echo's care. She spent countless hours by his side, offering him simple comforts, brushing his matted fur, speaking to him in soothing tones, and slowly coaxing him to trust her. At first, Echo would pull away at even the slightest touch, his body stiff and wary, as if expecting another betrayal. But slowly, Isla began to see signs that he was starting to believe again. It wasn't the large moments that marked progress. It was the little things. The way his ears perked up when she approached the barn, the soft nicker of recognition when she brought his food, and the way he leaned into her touch as she ran her hands over his ribs, helping him build strength again. One afternoon, after weeks of patience, Isla stood in front of him, holding a carrot in her hand. Echo's gaze was hesitant, but there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes. Slowly, he took a cautious step forward. Then another. Finally, he reached out, gently nipping at the carrot in her hand. The moment he took that bite, Isla's heart swelled. It was the first true sign of trust. A step forward, not just for Echo, but for both of them. That day, Isla whispered, "We're doing this together." But the journey wasn't without its setbacks. Echo's body, weakened from years of neglect, wasn't as quick to recover as Isla had hoped. A particularly cold night left him shivering uncontrollably, and Isla feared he would succumb to the harsh winter. She did everything she could to keep him warm. Blankets, extra hay, constant attention. But despite her best efforts, Echo's condition worsened. One morning, she found him struggling to stand, his legs buckling under him. Panic set in. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she checked for any signs of injury or infection. Echo's eyes were dull again, and the faint spark of life she had seen just weeks earlier seemed to flicker out. For the first time since taking him in, Isla felt the crushing weight of doubt. Was she too late? Had her dreams of saving him been nothing more than foolish hope? With a heavy heart, she called the only vet in town who would answer, "Dr. Thompson." He came out reluctantly, shaking his head as he examined Echo. "I'm sorry, Isla. It's just too much. This horse has been through too much trauma." He paused, looking at her sympathetically. "You've tried your best. Sometimes there's nothing more you can do." Isla clenched her fists, fighting back tears. She refused to give up, no matter what anyone said. Victor hadn't disappeared from her life, despite Isla's best efforts. In fact, he seemed to appear just when things were at their darkest. After hearing of Echo's deteriorating condition, he made it his mission to prove her wrong. One afternoon, Victor showed up unannounced at the barn, a smug smile on his face as he watched Isla try to coax Echo into standing. "You still think you can save him?" he mocked, arms crossed. "You're wasting your time. He'll never race again. And frankly, he's better off dead than living in this state." His voice was cold and dismissive. Isla's heart raced with frustration. She wanted to lash out, but instead, she took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "You don't understand. He's not just a horse to me. He's a soul that deserves a chance." Victor chuckled darkly. "A chance? For what? To suffer more? I know how these things go. I've seen it before." Isla knew she couldn't let him get to her, but his words stung. And yet, despite the bitterness in his tone, something in Victor's eyes shifted. Maybe, just maybe, he was more concerned than he let on. But Isla couldn't dwell on that now. She had to focus on Echo. Later that night, as she sat beside Echo in the barn, she held his head gently in her lap, whispering softly to him. "You're not alone. I'm here, and no one's taking you away from me." For weeks, Isla had felt like she was walking on the edge of despair. Each time she looked at Echo, the weight of his fragile body and the deep scars of his past seemed to pull them both further into darkness. But then came a day, a single moment, that would change everything. It was early morning, the sun barely breaking through the mist that clung to the fields. Isla was out in the barn, checking on Echo as she had done countless times before, her movements tired but steady. He lay in his corner, his body still and his breath shallow. She gently ran a hand over his back, her heart sinking as she felt the thinness of his muscles beneath her fingertips. Isla had just stepped back, preparing to grab more hay, when she heard it. At first, she thought she was imagining it. A soft rustling sound, followed by the faintest shuffle of hooves against the dirt. Isla froze, her breath catching in her throat. She turned slowly, her eyes wide in disbelief. There, standing on unsteady legs, was Echo. His once slumped posture had straightened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a spark in his eyes. His body, though still weak, seemed to be standing taller. Echo had managed to rise on his own. Isla's heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment she had been waiting for? She stepped closer, holding her breath. Echo, trembling slightly, turned his head to look at her. The bond they had built over these months seemed to echo in the air between them. His eyes, once filled with confusion and fear, now reflected a glimmer of trust. "Echo, you did it," Isla whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The horse took a hesitant step forward, his hooves making a soft sound against the floor. For the first time in weeks, Isla felt a sense of relief wash over her. The mountain they had been trying to climb together didn't seem so insurmountable anymore. But it wasn't just his physical progress that gave Isla hope. It was the shift in his spirit. Echo was no longer just a shell of a horse. He was beginning to awaken. Later that afternoon, she called Dr. Thompson again, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think he's getting better. He's standing on his own. I know it's small, but it feels like a breakthrough." The vet's response was cautious, but encouraging. "It's a good sign, Isla. Keep doing what you're doing. But don't get ahead of yourself. He still has a long road ahead." But Isla wasn't listening to the doubts anymore. She saw it now. Echo wasn't just surviving. He was coming back to life. And so, the journey continued, stronger, more determined than ever before. For the first time in a long while, Isla allowed herself to believe. There was hope. Echo could make it. The whispers in town had never stopped. While Isla had seen small glimmers of support from a few kind souls, the majority still regarded her efforts as a fool's errand. Victor's words continued to echo in her ears, and the townsfolk's skeptical glances were harder to ignore. "The horse is too broken," they would mutter. "She's wasting her time. He's just not built for racing." But Isla wasn't interested in their doubts anymore. It all came to a head when the local community decided to hold a small charity race. Nothing major, just a fun event for the townspeople to watch. The race was meant to be a display of skill and speed, but Isla saw it as more than just a competition. It was her chance to prove to the world, and to herself, that Echo was capable of more than anyone had ever given him credit for. The day of the event, Isla stood beside Echo in the stable, her hands trembling as she braided his mane. He looked stronger than ever. His ribs weren't as pronounced, and his body had developed a new strength. Though he was far from the racehorse he once was, Isla could see that something had shifted within him. He was no longer just surviving. He was ready. Victor, as expected, appeared with a cynical grin on his face, eyeing the pair with disdain. "This is going to be a joke," he muttered to anyone who would listen. "She thinks that sorry excuse for a horse is ready to race? It's pathetic." Isla didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her focus was on Echo, on the horse who had fought through so much, on the horse who had come back from the brink of death. The starting line was lined with eager spectators, but Isla's focus was on one thing: Echo. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her hands as she adjusted his bridle, his eyes alert and determined. There were doubts in the air, but none from her. This wasn't just about winning. This was about showing them all what Echo was capable of. As the starting signal went off, Isla urged Echo forward. At first, he lagged behind, his legs not yet accustomed to the speed of the track. But then, something unexpected happened. Echo's spirit flared. He found his rhythm, his powerful hooves hitting the dirt with confidence. The crowd gasped, some in shock, others in disbelief. Echo, once written off as broken and useless, was now charging down the track, gaining speed with every stride. Isla's heart raced in time with Echo's steps. Every moment felt like a dream, but it was real. They were in this together. There was no turning back now. Victor, watching from the sidelines, began to panic. "No, this can't be happening." His voice trailed off as he watched Isla and Echo pull ahead, leaving the other competitors behind. The crowd erupted in cheers as Echo rounded the final bend, his once weak body now graceful and powerful. Isla, her breath sharp and uneven, held on tightly, urging him forward with everything she had. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, Echo crossed the finish line, his hooves striking the earth with a triumphant thud. The crowd went wild. Isla could hardly believe it. They had done it. Echo had done it. In the aftermath of the race, as Isla stood in the winner's circle with Echo, the air was thick with excitement and pride. The crowd buzzed, and even the skeptical onlookers couldn't help but cheer for the unlikely duo. Echo had proven himself in a way no one had expected, and Isla had done it, not just for herself, but for Echo too. But amidst the celebration, there was one person who stood quietly on the edge, his face pale and unreadable. Victor. Isla noticed him first, his gaze focused on the ground, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He was no longer mocking her or making cynical remarks. Instead, there was a weight in his eyes that Isla had never seen before. As she made her way toward him, her heart raced with a mix of emotions. For months, Victor had been a thorn in her side, constantly undermining her efforts. But now, there was a shift in his posture. He looked less like the arrogant man she had once known, and more like someone who had been humbled by a force greater than himself. Victor cleared his throat as Isla approached, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I didn't think he could do it. I didn't think you could do it." His words were heavy, almost hesitant. "But you were right. I was wrong." Isla stood still for a moment, unsure how to respond. This was the last thing she'd expected. Victor's face softened, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that had been missing all along: regret. "I underestimated both of you. I was so caught up in what I thought was impossible that I couldn't see the potential in him, or in you." You gave him a second chance, a real chance. And for that, I respect you." The sincerity in his voice was palpable, and Isla couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. She had spent so many months proving him wrong, but now she saw that his words weren't just empty. They carried the weight of someone who had finally seen the truth. As the days passed after the race, Isla couldn't help but reflect on how far Echo had come. He wasn't just a racehorse anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of the unspoken bond between a human and an animal. Echo's victory wasn't just about winning a race. It was about proving that no matter how broken or bruised someone or something might be, there's always a chance for redemption. Echo had become a living testament to that truth. Isla continued to care for him with the same love and dedication as before. But now, there was a new sense of purpose in their relationship. Echo wasn't just her project. He was her partner, her friend, her success. Together, they had defied the odds, and that was something no one could ever take away from them. As the months went by, Isla received offers from top trainers who wanted to work with Echo, but she turned them all down. She didn't need the validation from the racing world to prove what they had accomplished. Echo had already given her more than she could ever ask for. Isla and Echo remained inseparable. He became not just a star in her life, but a symbol of hope and inspiration for others who had faced the seemingly impossible. She knew that the real legacy they had created wasn't just in the race. It was in the journey they had taken together. And one day, when Echo stood tall and proud in the pasture, watching the sunset with Isla by his side, she knew that the horse she had saved her in return. Together, they had rewritten their own story, one of courage, love, and undeniable strength. As the seasons changed, so did Isla and Echo. What began as a mission to heal a broken racehorse turned into something far greater. A partnership built on trust, love, and shared triumph. The barn that had once felt like a place of struggle now stood as a symbol of victory. Echo, the once fragile and scarred horse, had become the beating heart of Isla's world. Together, they had not only defied the odds, but had rewritten the narrative of what it meant to be broken and reborn. The town, once skeptical, had gradually embraced the story of Isla and Echo. The whispers had turned into admiration, the doubt into respect. People began to visit the barn, eager to witness the extraordinary bond between the woman and her horse. It wasn't just about the race anymore. It was about the way they had fought for each other, and, in doing so, found something beautiful. Isla often found herself standing in the barn at dusk, watching Echo graze in the golden light. The soft rustling of his hooves in the grass, the gentle sigh of the wind, and the peace in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. They had made it. They had won. But their story didn't end there. They became an inspiration, not just to those in the town, but to everyone who had ever felt like giving up. Isla and Echo proved that no one is ever truly beyond saving, that strength lies not just in the body, but in the heart. One day, as Isla and Echo stood together at the edge of the pasture, she looked out at the horizon, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She knew that they had been through something extraordinary, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Echo nickered softly, his eyes warm and calm. Isla reached out and touched his mane, her fingers running through the familiar strands. "You're more than I ever dreamed you'd be," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isla and Echo stood together, ready for whatever the future would bring. They knew, no matter what, they would face it as a team, together. As Ayla and Echo stand side by side, having overcome impossible odds, they show us that strength and resilience can transform any challenge into triumph. Their journey proves that it's never too late to start over, and no one is beyond redemption. Do you believe in second chances? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how you've witnessed or experienced the power of redemption in your own life. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this story of hope today. If you want to see more heartwarming stories like this one, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's always more inspiration on the way. Thanks for watching, and remember, no one is ever truly broken.